They say the worst kind of betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't come with shouting, or slammed doors, or shattered glass. It arrives quietly in an email sent to the wrong person, a whisper in the wrong ear, a name erased from a meeting invitation. That's how I found out. I'd spent 7 years building my reputation at Halberd Dynamics, a company that worshipped precision, numbers, and loyalty. I was one of the senior project leads, the guy management trusted with tight deadlines and impossible clients. I believed in merit, in the idea that hard work spoke louder than office politics. But in that building, politics didn't just speak, it screamed behind closed doors. It was a Thursday morning when my career began to crumble. An email landed in my inbox, not meant for me. It was from Ethan, my colleague and friend. The subject line read, "Transition Plan." Inside were forwarded messages between him and Amanda, our department director. They were discussing my project, my design, and how Ethan could take over leadership once David is reassigned. Reassigned? I scrolled, numb. My ideas, my reports, my months of work, repackaged under his name. And Amanda, the woman I defended more times than I could count, was the one pushing it through. "David's too idealistic," she'd written. "We need someone who understands the company's priorities." Translation, someone who wouldn't question her. I sat there staring at the screen, while the office hummed around me, keyboards clicking, printers spitting, people laughing about weekend plans. None of them knew that my trust had just been methodically dismantled. That afternoon, I was called into Amanda's office. She smiled like nothing was wrong. "David, you've been doing excellent work," she said, voice smooth as glass. "But we're restructuring. Ethan will take the lead on the upcoming client integration. You'll assist him. Of course, your insight is valuable. Assist him." I watched her talk, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her fingers toyed with her pen when she lied. I nodded like a good soldier, said of course, and walked out. But inside, something fundamental shifted. By the time I reached my desk, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too emotional. What I felt was clarity, a clinical, razor-edged focus that cut through everything else. They'd taken something from me, yes, but they'd also handed me something in return: motive. I knew Ethan's weaknesses, his shortcuts, his hidden folders, the things he bragged about after a few drinks. I knew Amanda's habits, the way she covered her tracks but always left fingerprints where she least expected. I didn't yell. I didn't quit. I smiled, shook hands, congratulated Ethan in front of everyone. I even stayed late that night, helping him get up to speed, and as I watched him struggle to understand the code I'd written, a code that was far more complicated than he realized, a quiet plan began to form in the back of my mind. Not revenge through rage. Revenge through logic. Revenge, if done right, looks nothing like anger. It looks like compliance. It looks like patience. For the next 3 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I showed up early, stayed late, offered Ethan guidance he didn't deserve. To the outside world, I looked like the model employee, loyal, supportive, humble. Inside, every move I made was a calculation. Ethan was ambitious, but lazy. He wanted recognition without responsibility. He loved shortcuts, the kind that worked fast but broke faster. Amanda adored that in him. She thought she could control him, and in a way, she was right. But neither of them could see the long game I was playing. Halberd Dynamics relied on one critical system, the integration platform. It linked client data, financial reports, and development logs across every division. If that system failed, the entire company would freeze. And guess who had built it? Me? I knew every line of code, every hidden pathway, every trigger buried deep inside. But I didn't touch it, not yet. First, I needed trust. I let Ethan take credit for small successes. I forgot to correct him in meetings. I made sure Amanda saw him as the golden boy. The more they believed I'd accepted my new place, the less they watched me. By the second month, Ethan was leading presentations he barely understood. He used my reports, my graphs, my logic, but wrapped it all in arrogance. He smiled like he'd earned it. And that's when I started planting the seeds. A small line of code here, an unnecessary patch there. Little things no one would notice unless they knew where to look. Each one harmless on its own, but together, they built a silent chain reaction waiting to ignite. I named it Project January. Not because it meant anything, but because January was cold, calculated, deliberate. Meanwhile, I gathered proof. Late-night email threads between Amanda and Ethan, screenshots of them manipulating reports, financial discrepancies hidden behind performance bonuses. I didn't need to expose them yet, I needed them to feel untouchable first. One Friday evening, Ethan leaned on my cubicle wall, grinning. "Hey man, big client meeting next week. Amanda said she's putting me up for a senior role. You'll still be on the team though, right?" His tone was friendly, almost condescending. I smiled. "Of course, Ethan. You deserve it." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Knew I could count on you." That night, I stayed until the cleaning staff came through. The office lights flickered, leaving only the glow of my monitor. I opened the integration logs, scrolled through thousands of lines, and inserted one final script encrypted, invisible, silent. It wasn't meant to destroy the company, just the people who'd used it as a weapon. When Ethan's project went live, everything would appear flawless until it didn't. And when it didn't, the system would point straight back to him. Amanda would protect herself, of course. She'd throw him under the bus the second things went wrong. And when the dust settled, both their names would be stained permanently, hers by guilt, his by failure. I sat back, watching the cursor blink. Revenge isn't fire. It's ice. It doesn't explode. It spreads, quietly, patiently, inevitably. And as I shut down my computer that night, one thought kept circling in my mind: they took my work. Soon, I'll take their legacy. The first crack looked like an honest mistake. It was the morning of the big rollout. The client had flown in. The conference room smelled of too strong coffee, and Ethan strutted in with the kind of grin that belongs to men who take trophies before they've earned them. Amanda sat at the head of the table like a queen who'd already signed the decree. I watched them from the back, a neutral face on, a notepad in hand. My palms were steady. Ethan started the demo. He read bullet points off the slides I'd written, used the metrics I'd optimized, and nodded like the work was his original thought. At minute 25, everything looked pristine: graphs, response times, uptime percentages. The client smiled. Amanda beamed. I could almost feel the congratulatory pats circling the room. Then, without fanfare, the dashboard blinked, data lagged, then doubled back on itself. Our reconciliation report showed duplicate entries that inflated totals. An API call timed out and threw a handful of requests into a queue that never emptied. The screen stuttered like a faulty heartbeat, and the demo's live feed froze. Ethan's grin faltered. He jabbed at his laptop, then at the console, searching for something to blame that wasn't his name. In the background, someone asked a pointed question about transactional integrity. Amanda's smile thinned into focus. The room tilted, and I watched the architecture of their confidence start to wobble. It took the engineers 10 minutes to stabilize what they could. The client was patient at first. Then someone asked for the raw logs, and that was the moment the trap turned from nuisance into indictment. A pattern emerged, a cascade of timestamps that didn't line up with the normal operational flow, conflicting reconciliation scripts that referenced a module Ethan had enabled, and a vendor payout schedule that doubled a single invoice across multiple accounts. The forensic logs were clinical. They didn't speculate. They simply laid out anomalies. Anomalies with Ethan's session tokens associated in places they shouldn't be. Ethan turned a dead white. He said, "There must be a bug." He said it like a prayer. Amanda asked him for an explanation in the crisp tone managers use when their reputations are at stake. Ethan fumbled through excuses: a patch he hadn't vetted, a cron job scheduled at the wrong interval, each sentence like a thread pulling loose in a sweater. People in that room were good at reading weakness. They moved toward it like wolves. Within hours, HR pinged him privately. Within a day, his access was suspended pending an investigation. Amanda emailed the executive team with the carefully honed language of damage control. "We are cooperating fully with IT and compliance to address an unexpected integration issue. Our teams are working to resolve service interruptions." No one blamed Ethan by name yet, but the ledger of evidence was already whispering. And whispering is contagious. Employees who'd been casual allies of Ethan started to look like witnesses. A junior analyst who'd once toasted his promotions now avoided eye contact. Vendors who'd once returned their calls aired concerns. The CEO quietly requested a full audit, a phrase that bristles like electricity in any company. I watched it all unfold like a slow-motion film. Ethan tried to salvage it. He called me at midnight from a block number voice raw. David, what the hell happened? I didn't touch anything, I swear. His words were soaked with panic. His arrogance had shrunk into pleading. I listened. I could have told him the truth. I could have hurled the dossier across the table and watched his world explode. But the point wasn't to watch them suffer publicly only to get closure privately. The point was inevitability, not spectacle. Instead, I asked calm questions. Did you run the staging tests? Who signed off on the release? I let him trip over answers. I did not offer him cover. I let the architecture of his excuses become the scaffold of his fall. The internal audit found more, an escrow payment to an obscure vendor with no verifiable business address, approval logs showing Ethan's credentials, and a string of altered timestamps that suggested someone had tried to rewrite history. Amanda's name appeared in passing, the signature on a memo that shifted leadership responsibilities. Suddenly, her distance from the issue was less convincing. She was implicated by proximity and by a trail of correspondence showing her urging speed and flexibility during budget discussions. The company reacted like a machine that smells smoke. Legal drafted interim notices. Compliance froze transactions. Investors called anxious questions that triggered deeper probes. The PR team trained to smooth edges released a statement so neutral it was poisonous. We are investigating internal irregularities affecting integration systems. We take these matters seriously. Ethan's phone went dark. Amanda's calendar cleared into a series of closed-door meetings. Their allies retreated politely. The office that had been a stage for their ascendancy became, and today's, a courtroom without a jury. I walked through the halls and felt a strange detachment. The people who passed me nodded out of habit, oblivious to the quiet reconfiguration of power. The thing I'd engineered, lines of code, a timing script, a buried packet, had done its job. It hadn't destroyed the company. It had exposed the rot under the sheen. And that was enough. There was a small irony I savored in private. They'd used me as a bulwark against disruption. Praised my methodical approach, called me steady. Now they needed steadiness in a way only I could provide. So, I leaned into that role. I offered help. I stayed late to answer questions. I debugged logs with a face of concern and the soul of a surgeon. But under the calm, new pressure built. Their panic didn't just hurt them, it rippled outward, catching people who had nothing to do with the betrayal. A junior developer's job was on the line. A vendor delayed payroll. The cost of the unmasking reached beyond Amanda and Ethan. When Ethan finally received the official notice of investigation, his mask slipped in a way that revealed a man who had never imagined consequence. Amanda's steady exterior cracked into a silence that was louder than any argument. They'd underestimated the architecture they'd been trying to manipulate. They'd underestimated me. When the machine starts, it doesn't care about faces. It only cares about output, about metrics, about whether the logs line up with the story people want to tell. And once the machine smelled smoke, it moved with that corporate ruthlessness that cleans itself by devouring reputations. The week after the rollout felt like living inside a pressure chamber. Every meeting had an edge. Every smile was an inquiry disguised as kindness. Ethan's voicemail filled with terse, clipped messages from HR. Amanda's public composure hardened into silence behind closed doors. The company brought in a third-party auditor, people who spoke in protocol and whose job was to find what you couldn't hide. The audit dug deeper than the initial anomalies. It pried open vendor histories, cross-checked timestamps, followed the money. It was methodical and exhausting, and every result fed the narrative I'd designed. The escrow payment that had looked like an accounting hiccup now had a paper trail that led to a mailbox and a Shell C. Consultancy, the Shell's contact person, conveniently, was a forwarding service in a different state. The accounts showed strange routing that matched the exact dates Amanda had authorized the accelerated deployments. She'd signed the memos on speed and flexibility. Her emails, written in the same elegant corporate tone she used to praise my work, now read like confessions when placed next to the transactional data. People don't collapse all at once. They unravel. Amanda began to disappear from lunches, from the small rituals that once made the week tolerable. Her office door shut earlier and earlier each day. Rumors started to jar at her edges. The board members whispered concern, a senior partner's private question over coffee. The kind of whispers that don't accuse directly but make other people start taking notes. Ethan did the opposite. He lurched. The arrogance that once buoyed him turned brittle. He became terse. Defensive. A man who answers emails too quickly because he's trying to outrun consequence. Once he'd relied on charm and away with selective facts. Now he relied on expedient lies that peeled away the way lacquer peels when left in the sun too long. The board called an emergency session. They wanted an explanation they could give to clients and investors that sounded competent and decisive. Amanda, before the meeting, tried to close the breach by pointing fingers at operational mishandling, at a supposed oversight in patch deployment. Her narrative was plausible in the way corporate theatrics can dress anything in responsibility. She had allies, and allies make persuasive case studies. I sat in that meeting and watched the theater of management unfold. Amanda spoke with the cadence of a rehearsed defense. Ethan mouthed support at the edge of the table like a dog trained to look obedient. But my evidence was a cold thing, not a rant, not an accusation, but data, attachments, audit trails. Data doesn't beg, it names. When she finished, she looked at me. That was the first time since the rollout her eyes cut through me with something like fear. Not for herself, but for the script that had given her power. She'd misjudged the middle ground, control without accountability. In that innermost calculus, she'd left a corridor for me to walk through. After the meeting, the legal counsel took Amanda aside. They spoke in careful tones about disclosure, negligence, fiduciary duty. Those words are the corporate version of arrows. They pierce, and they rarely miss. Amanda's response was uneven. You could see the old politicking attempt to rise. The facts kept resetting the room's geometry, making any rhetorical flourish stick like wet paper to a wall. I had been careful to stay in plain sight and to appear reasonable. I answered the auditor's questions with a demeanor I'd practiced in sleepless hours. I explained code paths, documented my tests, handed over copies of my work. The objectivity of my behavior made me appear trustworthy. People notice calm when they expect a meltdown. Calm is persuasive, but I wasn't purely passive. The next move needed to be subtle and unavoidable. If the audit only found anomalies, Amanda could attempt spin. If they found intent or pattern, she couldn't. So, I created a link that connected motive to action without me touching it in the open. I fed a copy of a carefully annotated timeline, dates, server logs, query IDs into the hands of the lead auditor, but I wrapped it with context. My notes about the importance of transparency, the potential client harm, the need for ethical governance. I let the narrative point to the places where the facts met policy violations. The result was inevitable. The auditor forwarded a formal request for executive review. The HR director sent an email asking Amanda to step aside while an independent review completed. The CEO, who had relied on Amanda's leadership, made a public statement about the company's commitment to integrity and placed the matter in external counsel's hands. That statement was polite and brief. It had the mass and finality of a gavel. In the days that followed, as the firm moved into a quieter, sterner phase of inquiry, I watched how people rearranged themselves around truth. Some who'd once flocked to Amanda and Ethan now walked new corridors. Some calls I placed, ostensibly to offer help, revealed new alliances forming in the wake of their fall. The rumor net spread wider. Clients were being notified, partnerships reviewed. The cost of their climb was rapidly converting into the cost of their descent. At home, I noticed my hands trembling at odd moments, not from fear, but fatigue. The deep tiredness that comes from carrying something heavy for so long. I had engineered the fall, but the emotional bill was due. A quiet voice in me asked if I'd gone too far. Another voice, the sharper one, that felt like justice, replied that some things require a scalpel, not a shout. Then something unexpected happened. Amanda's assistant, a small, efficient woman with a reputation for loyalty, stopped by my desk under the pretense of turning in expense reports. Her hand brushed mine and she said quietly, "Be careful. People are starting to look for who started this." Her eyes were honest, frightened. She didn't accuse, she cautioned. That line lodged in me. I realized I'd set a machine in motion that had no respect for the neat architecture I'd designed. Once you expose rot, it seeks oxygen, it spreads. And the last thing I wanted was to be its unintended fuel. So I made plans to finish, but with restraint. The last phase would not be about theatrical ruin. It would be about finishing the course with minimal collateral, as if mercy could be measured in The number of lives left intact. Because in a workplace, and like a battlefield, the fallout is measured in careers, families, and quiet reputations. I wanted them to pay. I did not want to drown in what I'd caused. It's strange how quiet revenge sounds when it's finally over. No thunder, no applause. Just the hum of fluorescent lights above your desk and the low murmur of voices outside a conference room. I used to imagine that when the moment came when Amanda and Ethan finally faced the consequences, there would be satisfaction, closure. But the truth is colder than that. It doesn't roar. It exhales. The company's final report was delivered on a Friday morning. 6 months of audits, interviews, legal memos, and silent hostility condensed into 27 pages. The findings were clear: manipulation of vendor data, breach of ethics policy, and deliberate concealment of financial inconsistencies. Amanda's signature appeared on every approval. Ethan's name on every transaction. My name appeared once buried in the appendix, attached to my documented reports, the ones that had sparked the initial review. It looked clean. Perfectly cleaned up by Monday. Both of them were gone. Amanda resigned to pursue personal projects. Ethan accepted accountability and left to focus on family. Corporate euphemisms for professional exile. I watched the email announcement go out, the generic language crafted to erase specifics. It was clinical, efficient, the kind of execution that left no blood, only absence. That evening, the floor was quiet. Most people had gone home early, exhausted by the day's theater. I lingered, just to see it empty, to hear the stillness where their voices used to echo. The office, stripped of their presence, felt sterile, almost peaceful. I looked through the glass walls of Amanda's old office. The desk was already cleared. The reflection staring back at me was tired, older than I remembered. I'd won, and yet, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like anesthesia. When I walked out into the night, the city was glowing, indifferent, alive. My phone buzzed once. An email from HR. Ethan filed a complaint naming you as the whistleblower. We've reviewed the evidence. There's nothing connecting you. You're safe. I stood on the corner reading that word, safe. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like a verdict. Weeks passed. The company stabilized, at least outwardly. New managers arrived, eager to rebuild what had been tarnished. I got a quiet promotion, director of systems integrity. A raise. A corner office. People congratulated me like it was a reward. They didn't see the truth behind my calm nods, the endless replay of everything that had happened. Every click, every message, every line of code that turned into a weapon. Justice, I told myself. Necessary correction. But under the surface, something hollow had formed. A silence that hummed in moments of stillness. One evening, as I was packing up, I found a letter slipped under my keyboard. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper. 2 words, handwritten in Amanda's familiar script, you too. No explanation. No threat, just that. It was enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at the words. It wasn't fear that gripped me, it was recognition. She wasn't wrong. I'd become the same kind of manipulator I despised, cold, methodical, precise. The difference between justice and vengeance had blurred until I couldn't tell which side of the mirror I stood on anymore. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The city air was heavy with rain, the streets glowing in slick reflections. Somewhere in that blur of lights, I realized that revenge doesn't end when the other person falls. It ends when you stop needing to watch them fall. I reached my apartment, opened my laptop, and archived the folder that had started everything, every email, every copy, every proof. Then I deleted it. The sound the computer made was small, almost fragile, but it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for months. Amanda and Ethan were gone. The company had survived. The system had purged itself. And me, I was free technically. But freedom doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means you've run out of enemies and the only one left to confront is yourself.